Hi class, and welcome to our 3.3 lesson on simplifying and factoring linear expressions. Let's get started. Before we start solving some simplifying linear expressions problems, here are a few tips. The first tip is that you always need to combine your like terms. That means if you have individual numbers with other individual numbers, you can combine them. And if you have variables, you need to combine them with like variables. So for example, if I have a plus 2a, then that would be 3a. If I have 8 plus 2, that would be 10. The second tip is to remember your integer rules and math properties. We are going to be adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing a lot of positive numbers and negative numbers. So you need to make sure that you remember your integer rules for those types of situations. As far as math properties are concerned, you are going to need to remember properties such as the distributive property, because we're going to be seeing a lot of those as well. Finally, the last tip is to keep your answers and your work lined up and organized. Remember that when we're solving these expressions, we need to be making sure that we put our equal signs all the way till we get our final answer. Now, it is important that I note here that each answer will be different. Sometimes you'll end up with a variable and a number. Sometimes you'll end up with a number. Sometimes you'll end up with a variable. You just need to know how to solve each of these problems and approach them using these steps. As a bonus note, when we're writing our final answers, you want to be mindful to always place the variable situation before you place your just plain number. So in a situation where we end up with 3c plus 12, we will write it 3c plus 12, not 12 plus 3c in most cases. Now let's jump into our first example problem, and I'm going to walk you through step by step on how I would solve this problem. The first thing that I would do is I would recognize that I have some like terms. I recognize that I have some b's and I have some just plain numbers. So the first thing I'm going to handle actually is going to be my two b's. Now, here's a rule of thumb. I'm going to start by underlining my two like terms that I'm going to start with. So I'm going to underline this, and then I'm going to underline negative 7b. Now here's why I'm going to do that. Most of you may have just underlined and dealt with 7b, but this minus symbol also doubles and lets us know that this is also a negative 7b. For those of you who've asked me, is this mean negative or does this mean subtraction? It essentially means the same thing. If I'm taking money from you, that means I'm subtracting money from you, which means you have a negative balance. It's all the same. So when we're looking at numbers that have an operation in front of them, we need to be mindful that we tack on that operation with the number. So right now, essentially, I have b minus 7b plus 2 plus 2. Now you might be wondering, how did you get this plus 2 plus 2? Well, if I look right here, there's a plus 2 and then there's a plus 2. Now I can go ahead and solve my b situation. Since there's no since there's no number in front of b, it is understood that b, and I'll write this on the side, b is the same thing as 1b. Okay? So essentially this is just like saying 1 minus 7. Okay? We're still dealing with our b situation. If I type this in my calculator, 1 minus 7, or if I solve it here, I can know based on my integer rules that this is the same thing as 1 plus negative 7. Okay? And since my negative is higher than my positive, that means my answer here is going to be negative 6. And if you type that into your calculator, you would get negative 6. So our b situation is actually going to be negative 6b plus, what's 2 plus 2? 4. And so this is my simplified expression. And by the way, for those of you who didn't know what an expression is, it's basically a combination of numbers and variables, but they don't have an equal sign on the actual problem. Okay? But we know that the simplified version of this is this. And so negative 6b plus 4 is going to be our final answer. Now, let's go to the second problem. With this problem, I can see that I have 3 in parentheses m minus 5, close parentheses, plus m. This is a situation where I'm going to have to use my distributive property and distribute this 3 by multiplying 3 times m and 3 times, you guessed it, negative 5, because this is m minus 5. So, the first thing we're going to do is bring down what 3 times m is. 3 times m is 3m minus 3 times negative 5 is 15. So, I'm just going to bring down this negative and bring down this 15 plus m. Okay? Now I'm going to see that I have 2 like terms, and my 2 like terms are my m's. So, I have 3m and I have positive m. So this is the same thing as saying, if I want to line them up correctly, or line them up in a way that I can understand it, this is the same thing as 3m plus m minus 15. The only thing I did here was reorganize it so I could deal with my m's. Now, remember, just like in the beginning, if a variable is by itself, it's understood that that number in front of it is 1. So, with that being said, this is the same thing as saying 3m plus 1m, and that will give me 4m minus 15. And there's nothing further that I can simplify this to, so this is my final answer. Let's look at our last problem very quickly. The first thing I have is I know that I have 9x minus 8 plus 6. So, my 2 common situations here are my 9x and my 9x. Now, if I have 9x and I subtract 9x, and x is the same thing, we don't know what that variable means, but we know that x and x are the same. That's just like saying you have 9 pieces of candy and someone takes 9 pieces of candy. How many do you have left? The answer there is going to be 0. Okay? Because if we have a positive and an equal negative, they cancel each other out. So, that means I have 0 minus 8 plus 6. Now I just use my integer rules. Negative 8 is a higher number than positive 6, so I know that my final answer, when I type this in my calculator, negative 8 plus 6 is going to equal negative 2. And that's my final answer. Okay? So, as you can see, in all of our examples, the answers looked a little differently. Here's what I want you to do. I want you to try these 3 problems, and once you are done, I want you to come and get them checked by me. And then, I don't want you to move to the bottom just yet. I want you to actually try the IXL practice. And then, once you complete those 2 practice situations with accuracy, then I want you to come back to our second video on factoring linear expressions, and we'll go from there. See ya!